we now have several people in the room, and I'd like to greet you all a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to ETC Group's webinar on geoengineering and climate negotiations. Before we start, let me just give a very quick some reminders for everyone as guidance. So as we said in the invitation, this webinar will be in English. It will also be recorded, and we will try to keep this webinar within 60 to 70 minutes. Maybe also maybe request all of you to rename yourselves. Just put your name and then your organizations after. And then we request also that let's all keep our microphones muted during the presentation. We encourage all of you to use the chat function for introductions, interaction, information sharing, questions, and for sharing your insights and thoughts. And lastly, at the end of the presentations, we have a discussion part, and if you wish to speak, just kindly use the raise hand function on Zoom. So let me start with an introduction. Again, we welcome all of you, and thank you for joining us in today's webinar. I am Nikki Miranda Martinez. I'm based in the Philippines, and I support ETC Group, also the Hands of Mother Earth Coalition Against Geoengineering. So for everyone's information, ETC Group is a small international NGO that monitors the impacts of emerging technologies and corporate strategies on biodiversity, agriculture, and human rights. Geoengineering has been in ETC's radar for more than a decade now, and we have been working tirelessly with allies to resist this very destructive and distracting climate fall solution. Today, I am joined by my colleague, Neth Danyo, who is also based in the Philippines and ETC's Asia Director, to share with you the big narratives promoting geoengineering and explore where we see geoengineering in the international negotiation spaces. So before going into the main topic of today's webinar, let me just give you a brief overview of what geoengineering is. So geoengineering, or climate geoengineering, is a set of proposed technologies to intentionally intervene and alter Earth systems on a mega scale, particularly to manipulate the climate to counteract some of the effects of climate change. It is, in short, a technofix for climate change. So, as proposed by geoengineers themselves, we can categorize the proposed geoengineering techniques into three. We have carbon dioxide removal, solar radiation management, and weather modification. So carbon dioxide removal is the removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere after they've been emitted. And examples of these include carbon capture technologies, direct air capture, we have ocean fertilization, enhanced weathering, and so on. And then we have solar radiation management, which aims to reflect sunlight back into space to reduce the warming effect. And examples of proposed SRM techniques include stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, sea foam or microbubble, and space mirror, if you can believe that. And last, we have weather modification, which is the large-scale manipulation of the weather, and this is done through cloud seeding. So this, sharing you this infographics, which was produced for ETC by a young artist. It will be available in full scale, in full resolution in the Assess Technology website. I will share links later on the chat for you so that you can access the many materials that ETC has produced over the years. So as I earlier mentioned, ETC has been collaborating with many allies through different movements, including Hands Off Mother Earth, the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice, CBD Alliance, the Climate Land Ambition and Rights Alliance, to denounce geoengineering. And these are some of the main reasons why from more than 10 years ago to this very day, we continue to oppose geoengineering. So it requires intensive exploitation of vast areas of land or ocean, which would displace millions of people and wipe out entire ecosystems. Geoengineering does not address the root causes of climate change. It comes with so much major risks and unknowns, and would actually increase greenhouse gases. It is an extremely dangerous distraction from real and just climate solutions. And because geoengineering has the potential to, change weather pattern in a very predictable way, there's a legitimate fear of geoengineering being weaponized as well. So geoengineering has been creeping onto the agenda of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, despite the multiple concerns about potential and far-reaching environmental and social impacts. And there are greenwashing narratives introduced into the UNFCCC over a number of years that paved the way for the acceptance of geoengineering within climate negotiation spaces. First, we have the net zero narrative. Net zero assumes that continued and even increased emissions can be balanced by the removal of carbon from the atmosphere or compensated through carbon offsets. However, this is an accounting trick that facilitates the continued extraction of fossil fuels rather than reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So over 2,000 of the world's largest companies have been announcing net zero pledges by the end of this year in anticipation of the establishment of a new carbon market mechanism under Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement, which my colleague Neth will talk more about later. There's also scientific evidence that shows that there's no space left in the atmosphere to continue emitting at our current levels, much less increase the levels of greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore there is no room for offsetting either. And to avoid real solutions and continue with business as usual, the biggest world polluters have been championing climate neutrality or net zero through appropriating natural ecosystems and other landscapes and trade them as carbon sinks through massive crop and tree plantations. There is also, of course, technological fixes to artificially remove carbon from the atmosphere, and it includes some of the proposed technofixes or geoengineering techniques include carbon capture and storage, carbon capture use and storage, direct air capture, bioenergy with carbon capture use and storage, ocean fertilization, enhanced weathering, and biochar. So these false solutions, these technofixes, are all speculative. None have proven useful as a means of effectively and permanently removing atmospheric carbon. They will likely drive an overall increase in greenhouse gas emissions due to massive resources required, new infrastructures and facilities necessary, and high energy and water demands. Carbon dioxide removal proposals will reproduce and deepen unjust patterns of extraction and exploitation of land and resources, both in the global south and in communities impacted by extractive industries in the global north. Large-scale CDR would have devastating impacts on local communities, natural ecosystems, such as land grabs, human rights violation, and sharp increase in food prices. And the second big narrative that we have is nature-based proposals. So nature-based solutions or nature-based climate solutions were defined to be intentionally vague so that it can be applied to as many measures as possible to maximize the appropriation and or manipulation of our natural ecosystems, including forests, land, coast, and oceans. So geoengineering proposals that are often labeled as nature-based solutions include large-scale plantations, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage or BECCS, large-scale macroalgae cultivation, and the genetic engineering of plant and soil microbes. Having strong greenwashing narratives help facilitate corporate grab of natural ecosystems to claim them as carbon sinks that can be used to offset emissions. BECCS is labeled as a nature-based solution despite monoculture plantation being completely unnatural. The IPCC, in fact, stated in their February 2022 report that proposed methods of carbon dioxide removal, such as BECCS and afforestation, could compromise ecosystem health and food and water security. There are also proposals to genetically manipulate crops and trees to absorb more carbon or reflect more sunlight, combining both the risks of geoengineering and genetic manipulation. There are research projects that aim to genetically engineer the whole soil microbiota to force it to absorb more carbon. And a further greenwashing narrative to watch out for is ecosystems restoration through false solutions and technofixes. And just to flag all of you here, there is a World Commission appointed by geoengineers. What is this commission? So a top-down initiative driven by geoengineering promoters in the global north, appointing a group of retired politicians to establish a climate overshoot commission. So you will see their logo here on this slide on the upper right hand. The executive secretary and advisors to this commission are well-known solar geoengineering promoters. They attempt to appear official, including imitating the UNFCCC logo. And some of the members are known for their activities causing climate change. We just wanted to flag all of you about this commission because they will also be participating in COP27. So these greenwashing narratives are being used by big polluters to put geoengineering on the table as the climate crisis worsens and demands for urgent action become louder. We need to challenge this in the climate negotiation spaces and in other international fora. So with that, I will pass the floor to my colleague, Neth, who will discuss and share with us where and how geoengineering is appearing in climate negotiation spaces. So next.
Nikki, before you move to me, you might want to address, I think, a few things in the chat that actually concern your presentation. Like, I think there's one that I just to break this to engage participants a bit. I think there's a comment from Catherine from the Pacific Indigenous Women's Network that haven't countries already spoken before the UN about geoengineering being used against them? You might want to give some inputs on how has been this discussed in the CBD and the London Convention, London Protocol, just to break that the presentation flow.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. And thank you, Catherine, for sharing this on the chat. So it actually, geoengineering, there is a ban on the London Convention, London Protocol issued a ban on ocean fertilization. And there is also a moratorium in the CBD on geoengineering, precisely because this has been recognized long ago, that it is destructive, it is risky, and that it has so many, that it will affect the environment and the people. Yeah, let me just read some more. Like so thank you for your engagement on the chat. That is true. As Catherine mentioned, the CBT moratorium is in place, but countries like the USA are agreement incapable to. And it's not just the United States. Actually, there are many countries, the biggest polluters, really try to challenge these existing ban, this existing moratorium, and even even in the IPCC deliberations, they try to water things down to their benefits. Yeah, so I invite Net if she has any more to add.
I could. So this is just to inform colleagues that we actually planned all questions and comments to be read at the end. But I just thought that since there's been very active engagement in the chat, that we should not lose the momentum, because some of the questions, some of the comments are actually pertaining specifically to Nikki's presentation, some of the things that she said in her presentation. I'd like to read two more just to provide the context. A colleague from Via Campesina in Europe said that you're speaking of these techniques in the future are they already used? Some of these techniques are already used without our knowledge, largely because there are no rules, no regulations in place until the 2010 soft moratorium in the CBD came along on all climate geoengineering related techniques, and also in 2008 on ocean fertilization, again in the CBD, but at the national level, there were actually none, I would say, until then. Ocean fertilization, for example, has been experimented, I have to emphasize that bold in large letter, in the open seas, often in international waters, without regulation, again, without any rules, and in large tracts of oceans and seas. In particular, in the area of the South Seas, for example, there are dozens of experiments on ocean fertilization over the past 20 years that are really below the radar of civil society, even below the radar of governments. And all of those experiments were actually experiments on techniques, on hardware, on, as I mentioned, ocean fertilization, largely pumping of iron particles in the ocean to see how it would promote growth of phytoplankton that would absorb carbon from the atmosphere. Also, there were experiments on ocean downwelling, ocean upwelling, and until before the CBD adopted a moratorium on ocean fertilization that rolled on later to a ban on in the London Convention, London Protocol, as mentioned by Nikki. There was even a blatant experiment in the Sulu Seas in the boundary of Malaysia and the Philippines in 2007 and 2008 that ETC group actually came about and was shared with Philippine-based NGOs and civil society, which actually led the Philippine government to condemn an experiment by Australian scientists turned entrepreneur who were experimenting on ocean nourishment technologies, which is largely dumping of nitrogen in a certain part of the Sulu Seas, again, with the claim of promoting the growth of planktons that would absorb carbon from the atmosphere and theoretically would bury this under the seabed or ocean bed when the plankton reach the end of their lives. This has been largely condemned by the Philippine government and also by a group of ocean and marine scientists all over Asia Pacific because of the impacts on biodiversity and also the impacts on livelihood of artisanal fishers. So these are, while most of the technologies mentioned by Nikki are theoretical and often fantastical, there are some, a few that were actually tried out that are already used without regulation. Again, as I mentioned, Nikki also mentioned cloud seeding, weather modification. This is largely, again, unregulated, but largely used since the 50s. Those of us in Asia are very familiar with upland papayi of the US that was launched during the US-Vietnam War to modify rain patterns to flush out the Vietnamese communists under their lair by promoting thunderstorms. So these are examples, no? And again, I think there was also a mention here about China trying it out. That's weather modification. Largely, there's a ministry. Yes, I'm not sure if it's called Ministry of Weather Modification, but they did engage in massive weather modification during the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the communist victory. Also, some other, I think, even during the Beijing Olympics, no. So there are these experiments. We would call them experiments because even weather modification has a lot of controversies in terms of impacts on weather, on rainfall patterns, and also transboundary impacts. So just to put that, because there's, as I noted, there's really a very active, thank you so much for that, there's very active engagement among the participants on this, that it would be a waste not to take on and build on that momentum right now. So thank you so much for that. So I think there was also a response, no, to Hillary of SAM that the Overshoot Commission is different from the Earth Overshoot Day, which includes, I think, WWF and some of the big green NGOs. Yeah. Okay. My presentation, I will share my screen now. Sorry. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. Can you see my screen now? Okay. Sorry about this. There's too much in my screen now that I cannot see my own screen. Yeah, okay. So my presentation actually builds on what Nikki has presented by focusing on how geoengineering or where geoengineering is coming up, rearing its ugly head at the UNFCCC negotiations, and we actually more broadly call climate negotiations because a number of negotiations are actually going on apart from the official one in the UNFCCC, in the shadows of G20, also in different informal consultations and also different parts of the UN that may have impact or may shape the discussions at the UNFCCC, in particular in Sharm el-Sheikh, where COP27 will be in November. First, that I will mention, I have to caution you that if you will wait for the mention of geoengineering in the negotiations, you might be disappointed because barely anyone would mention geoengineering for a number of reasons. First, because it's such a toxic term that it actually attracts negative reaction oftentimes and could be very controversial. So even the IPCC, for example, has in its report on 1.5C that came out, the special report that came out in 2018, actually recommended to avoid the use of the term geoengineering and instead refer to the two categories that make up geoengineering, as mentioned by Nikki. One is carbon dioxide removal, and second is on solar radiation management, which may be creeping in far behind carbon dioxide removal in UNFCCC negotiations. I will actually go through some of the more specific techniques or approaches that will come up or that have come up in the UNFCCC negotiations since we also got shocked when we heard about this techniques being mentioned in the official negotiation process in Bonn in June during the subsidiary body meetings that are going to input into the COP27. First, building on Nikki's big narrative presentation on net zero and also nature-based solutions, I'd like to start by mentioning carbon farming. Because carbon farming, we would expect this to come up as a key concept in the context of the discussions on large-scale monoculture plantations, also in the context of the discussions in BECCS, which is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, which Nikki said has been repeated again and again in the UNFCCC and climate negotiations in general, also in the IPCC report since AR4 or AR5. The IPCC report in February 2020, the Working Group 3 report actually mentioned proposed methods of carbon dioxide removal, such as BECCS and afforestation, but also caution that these techniques could compromise ecosystem, health, food, and water security. Also, there were mentioned about two other vast non-conventional carbon sinks that industries and financial markets are pursuing to get recognized into the carbon markets, namely agricultural soils and oceans. And agricultural soils is the context where carbon farming would come up, not to mention in BECCS. For agricultural lands, profiting from carbon offsets requires transforming agriculture into a new carbon farming model. Carbon farming, by the way, is not just coming up in the UNFCCC, but as well in other spaces of the UN, including FAO and the Convention on Biodiversity. In the bigger context outside of the UN, big digital agribusiness players have been stepping forward to offer themselves as the brokers for these highly problematic and unproven soil offsets and governments. In some of the recent releases hailing the promises and the potentials of carbon farming, they were even saying that the latest farm product is actually not crops, not soil, but carbon credits, because global cropland is said to have the potential to sequester as much as 570 million metric tons of carbon per year. And this could actually offer a vast pool for carbon credits. That's why they came out with this term carbon farming. You actually farm carbon and sell that and trade that carbon by earning carbon credits or trading that in the carbon market. So there were even assertions that carbon is like the new crop of the future. You'll see this more and more, especially as we see the expansion and widespread promotion of agricultural digitalization, not just in the North or developed countries, but in developing countries increasingly. In Asia, there's been very aggressive promotion of agricultural digitalization, which are being promoted by big agricultural companies, the names of which are quite familiar to us. Bayer, which owns Monsanto, Syngenta, BASF, Corteva. These are the big names that are the same big names that control global commercial seeds and also global commercial agricultural chemicals, are the same names that are actually behind the push for agricultural digitalization, but this time in tandem with new players from small startups are promoting drones and all sorts of imaging devices to capture images and data from farms and feeding them into the clouds and platforms owned by the big tech companies, namely Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and we also have players like Facebook increasingly investing in food retail, not just in developed countries, but in developing countries as well. I have to mention this because these are the players that are the same players that are pushing for carbon farming. I will not go into the details of that. Also, if we go into the marine and coastal area, marine geoengineering is gaining traction again. As mentioned by ETC, by Nikki, ETC has been following geoengineering over the past almost 20 years. And ocean fertilization and marine geoengineering is one of the first that we've tracked. I mentioned a few cases in my earlier slide. And for a number of years, in the past 5-10 years, we've actually thought that ocean fertilization is dead because there's almost unanimous voices among marine and ocean scientists globally that ocean fertilization poses more harm and actually has overinflated benefits as claimed by their proponents. So for a while, it actually languished in the sidelines, but with all the conversations about the promises of oceans as the biggest carbon sink, with all the promotion of blue carbon, and also the emergence of carbon market that could actually accept the marine geoengineering technologies as ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere, ocean fertilization is like a zombie that has actually keep on rising from the grave and presenting itself as a solution or as the solution in some context. So in many ways, ocean fertilization actually involve and marine engineering, by the way, also apart from ocean fertilization, also involved massive plantations of microalgae or marine forests, which actually have similar consequences and similar issues to monoculture plantations. Like large monocultures in terrestrial areas, large monocultures of algae also pose a threat to the natural marine environment by occupying niches that are used for livelihood, where artisanal farmers and coastal communities depend their food and sustenance and livelihood. At the same time, large monocultures of algae have been shown to attract diseases and displace biodiversity and also disrupt the food chain where natural algae are embedded. There are also scientific articles recently. We will actually provide links to this, if not in this chat, in the upcoming briefing that we are producing together with Rosa, Luxemburg, Stiftung, New York. There are scientific articles that show that the supposed capacity, vast capacity of oceans to sequester carbon seems to be poor. Also, that through kelp farming or monoculture of algae, that the actual sequestration of carbon is actually far lower than what's claimed by the proponents, covering large parts of the seas and the bottoms of the oceans with such massive amount of dead organic matters, including kelps, actually carries many uncertainties and potential impacts. Now I'll go to Article 6.4. Article 6 being very controversial as an outcome of the Paris Agreement, one of the most controversial provisions of the article of the Paris Agreement. We focus now on Article 6.4. I have to say, at this point that ETC actually never intend to engage in Article 6 monitoring or actually advocacy or lobbying, but the recent developments around the discussions of the supervisory body for the mechanisms under Article 6.4 have actually brought our attention towards this. Article 6.4, as we see it, is actually building the market for an explosion of false solutions, including geoengineering, aka carbon dioxide removal technologies. Just for a backdrop, Article 6.4 is meant to replace the UN's Clean Development Mechanisms, which is a legacy from the Kyoto Protocol, and then which will transition into this new mechanism under the Paris Agreement. There's been a lot of critics by groups who have been following this, discussions about allowing the CDM carbon emissions reduction projects to transition under this 6.4 mechanism, which could continue using dated methodologies until 2025 and could result to nightmare scenarios of billions of tons of junk credits being issued. I will not go into that. That's not our expertise. But again, we were actually shocked to say that the supervisory bodies discussions in July and September have actually gone into discussing carbon dioxide removal techniques that are being considered under Article 6.4, which includes BECS, bioenergy carbon capture and storage, DAC or direct air capture, also enhanced weathering, ocean alkalization, and ocean fertilization. That's zombie ocean fertilization, which are all false solutions. The information note that was actually used as a guide for the discussion in September by the supervisory body of the Article 6.4 mechanism actually based a lot of assumptions on industry, false assumptions about the capacity of techniques, of these geoengineering techniques, including CCS, claiming so much carbon reduction when in fact scientific studies show that including the large CCS project have not actually functioned as they promised to be, or have grossly underperformed, or have been super inflated in terms of what they claim to are they reducing? And of course, not to mention that they have cost billions of dollars to deploy. There are also some discussions that came up with in the Article 6.4 discussion about details like proposed fee structures in the market mechanism that would actually waive these fees for least developed for projects and removal activities that are in LDCs and small island developing states, which may actually have profound adverse consequences on resource grab, including land grab in the global south, also in promoting climate colonialism and creating additional burden on communities. For us, Article 6.4 is quickly taking shape in the lead up to COP, and we really need to reject carbon markets and of course ensuring that all false solutions in geoengineering will not end up in the list of removal activities. Another area where geoengineering has been creeping in the UNFCCC discussion is of course the ocean and climate change dialogues. This may sound not too not too dangerous to many because it's just a dialogue. But then dialogues in experts dialogues in the climate negotiations don't happen by themselves. They don't happen as an end, but they're actually often means, no? To bring in experts input, technical inputs to inform discussions that are happening or will happen in the UNFCCC negotiations. In the last discussion on the ocean and climate change dialogue in June in Bonn, the goal was, of course, to strengthen ocean climate action for adaptation and mitigation. And we were quite surprised, or maybe we shouldn't have been surprised, that a lot of the discussions actually were about promoting blue bonds, blue carbon systems, nature compliant system, nature as a capital, also about promoting carbon market mechanisms, digitalization and precision agriculture, and also technological fixes and false solutions, making use of the potentials, the vast potentials of the oceans as carbon sinks. Of course, often the voices and involvement of fisher folks and coastal communities are lost, and was lost during the climate change and oceans dialogue in Bonn, where the local voices were evidently absent. We also note, like I would probably need 2-3 minutes more, Nick, sorry about this. We also note, we'd like to highlight some other still truths. We call them still because, as I mentioned, none of them will actually mention geoengineering as a magic term or as a polluted term. But there were actually a lot of voices pushing for carbon dioxide removal mostly from states that were the usual culprit, the fossil fuel producing states, the Gulf states, where actually they brought in geoengineering proposals, particularly carbon dioxide removal proposals in different tracks of the climate negotiations, which we expect as well will come up in Sharm el-Sheikh. We call them still because they're not outright, and the intent is actually to normalize the discussions of these proposals and techniques as part of the entire track. Voluntary cooperation in Article 6.8, which is actually meant as a counterweight to the market mechanism under Article 6.4, and should be focusing on non-market cooperative approaches, could be one, especially using technology transfer, technology sharing, and cooperation, whether that's north-south, triangular, or south-south cooperation and capacity building as possible vehicles for carbon dioxide removals to be deployed, and also to be developed in a cooperative way in developing and developed countries. Also, we are concerned that the discussions on registration of methodologies that involve carbon dioxide removal in Article 6.4 could actually pollute and infect the discussion on non-market cooperative approaches or voluntary cooperation in Article 6.8. The global stocktake, we actually did not think that geoengineering would come up there. And yet, during the experts' dialogues, the roundtables in Bonn, in particular, the GST dialogues on mitigation and means of implementation in Bonn in June, there were several parties that actually put on the table proposals for pushing for carbon dioxide removal, such as carbon capture and storage, DAC, and other techniques on carbon removal as ways, for mitigation, to push through for mitigation. Another area that we were actually keeping an eye on this for a number of years, but for the first time, openly in Bonn, there were parties, the same usual suspects, that actually have put on the table discussions and proposals on carbon dioxide removal in the context of the response measures track, which focuses on beneficial or detrimental social, economic, political, and environmental impacts of the implementation of climate actions, such as the deployment of renewable energy technologies that could result to transformation of entire economies. So Gulf states in particular were actually pushing for CCS and other carbon dioxide removal in order to support them in the transformation of their economies as a result of global shift to renewable energy technologies. And I have to mention that this is one track which is often below the radar of many NGOs. I see a few, like Yuri, for example, who's now in this webinar. I see him there sometimes, but largely CSOs don't follow this. But notably, Gulf states in particular have actually invested heavily on engagement on response measures, both as a proactive and defensive approach in the climate negotiations. Lastly, in the same vein as CCS, DAC, and other carbon removal technologies are being brought in stealthily in the global stocktake through the technical experts dialogue. The same technologies have actually came up in the structured experts dialogues that are providing input into the second periodic review under the UNFCCC. Lastly, I'd like to show you this slide just for you to convey, what do we want to demand in the climate negotiations in the context of geoengineering technologies rearing up their ugly heads in climate negotiations. We'd like to demand, of course, and this has been a demand of civil society and social movements under the climate justice umbrella, that real actions and real solutions are needed to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 C. We don't need geoengineering. We definitely don't need the carbon market to deliver this. I'm sorry, I actually got distracted by something here. Sorry. Oh, okay. That UNFCCC must focus on ensuring the deep and rapid reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases, not on ways to mask or compensate for continued emissions such as carbon markets. Also, that none of these geoengineering technologies that are being proposed will reduce emissions, nor will they address any of the root causes of climate change, and will actually delay or even distract from the rapid reduction of emissions that the world needs. Thirdly, all geoengineering proposals are speculative, as mentioned by Nikki at the first part of the presentation. None of them cannot be deployed at scale without a massive impact on ecosystems such as marine and coastal ecosystems. And they also pose significant risks to environments and human rights of people, including the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and peasants and farmers, and as well as on food sovereignty. Fourth, the UNFCCC and its bodies must recognize and honor the precautionary decisions on geoengineering technologies adopted at the CBD and the London Convention and Protocol, as already explained by Nikki earlier, and that the UNFCCC or any of its bodies, including the Article 6.4 mechanism, should not sanction activities that are being restricted and regulated in other UN fora. Also, we'd like to strengthen our call that no geoengineering technique should be approved to be registered as potential removals under the mechanisms of Article 6.4 and Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement, the entire Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Lastly, that no marine geoengineering proposals should be considered under the ocean and climate dialogues. So I'd like to end my presentation there, and Nikki will actually lead us in the discussion and questions. Thank you.
So the floor is now open for discussions. We encourage comments, inputs, questions. You can raise it via chat or raise your hand if you want to speak or share anything. And we thank everyone again for engaging in the chat.
Okay.
We have a hand from Genevieve.
Hello, and thank you for your very interesting presentation. Well, in fact, I'm not completely involved in this topic at the Via Campesina Europe level, but it is very important because I follow different topics related to European policies, and especially food policies. And at the moment, there is a strong push to present all the smart technology as an answer to climate problems. But do you have, on the other hand, any documents, any proofs about what are the potential of agroecological methods and of peasant agroecology? Because it is something to oppose. Are the methods that we can provide, natural method to mitigate climate change, are they sufficient? Is there any proof that we can move forward? So thank you. And thank you very much for your explanation.
Thank you, Genevieve, for the question. We could actually provide in the link our banner publication on Who Will Feed Us. That is actually up for updating, but our publication on Who Will Feed Us actually provides useful references on how agroecological approaches, peasant agroecology in particular, actually contribute to cooling the planet, addressing global warming, while producing food for at least 70% of the global population, and also how agroecological practices of peasants and small-scale agricultural producers have actually contributed to enriching soil as a resource and as carbon sink, and also optimally using water resources and other resources that are needed to produce food and provide livelihood for communities globally. So one of my colleagues will actually provide the link to the Who Will Feed Us, and just to also acknowledge that many of these references were actually shared by colleagues in the food sovereignty movement led by Via Campesina. Thank you.
We have a question on the chat from Catherine. There's a UN Special Rapporteur on climate change now. Has ETC notified him of concerns? So just to share with all of you, ETC does not work alone. We collaborate with many allies through many movements. And some of our allies are here with us today. Personally, I don't think ETC has directly communicated with the UN Special Rapporteur on climate change yet. But if anyone would want to share, any information or update, please do so, whether via chat or by raising your hand and speaking. Thanks for flagging this, Catherine.
I think we should acknowledge, as mentioned by Nikki, colleagues in the Home campaign, the Hands Off Mother Earth campaign, in particular, CIEL, the Center for International Environment and Law. Their colleagues in Geneva have been engaging with Ian Fry in the context of climate change and human rights discussion, where geoengineering or climate geoengineering have actually come up in recent months. So CIEL, also Hendrik Bol Foundation, and other colleagues in Home have actually been engaging in that front, and definitely the UN Special Rapporteur on climate change and development is one important process, not person, but the process that he's laying out for us to really push for our demands under the banner of climate justice banning geoengineering.
We have a comment from Anton on the chat. My concern is limiting global average temperatures to 1.5 C is already highly unlikely without some climate interventions. Would you, Anton, like to share more to the group?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thanks for the excellent presentation. So yeah, the thing I was just thinking about that as the 1.5 target could already be lost because of global dimming, for example, masking a lot of the global warming at the moment. And also some recent studies suggest that 1.5 degrees of warming would mean a likely tipping of some of the Earth system tipping points. So my big concern is this also some risk that we should take into account when we consider the risks of climate geoengineering, if that makes any sense. Thanks.
So Catherine has been responding via chat. Thank you so much for these responses, Catherine. Maybe I want to invite you to speak if you want to share your thoughts.
Good. I just would like to thank the organisers for this opportunity for us to come together. It's a really tough issue to talk about because so many people have this cognitive dissonance that this technology is even possible. So many people still, for some reason beyond me, have faith and trust in their governments. Even when we know that many governments are actually just puppets of large corporations now. Some corporations have more finance than some countries. So I'm not exactly sure where to start. I've put some comments in the chat if people want to look at them, but I would say that there seems to be a bigger crisis happening amongst humanity, and that is our disconnect with nature and this idea that we think we can techno-fix our way out of this. And it just seems like every time we offer a technical fix, it's like a pancake on top of the last mistake we made, and we just keep building on our mistakes and making the whole scenario infinitely worse, which just leads us to think at some point it's all going to just cave in like a Jenga game, I suppose. I'm actually involved with a group who are trying to focus on the metaphysical action. So our spiritual ceremonies of Indigenous peoples and such, because we believe working on the physical plane, we're not going to be able to change it. It's too far gone. So we have to go to the quantum level, the metaphysical level of creation where the solutions really lie. And our Indigenous knowledges tell us this is eminently doable. So if anyone's interested in that, I've put my email in the chat. You can contact me about that. There was a question about the 1.5. I've been, following the climate crisis. I don't use change. That's disingenuous. It's not change. It's a crisis situation. And I would encourage people to use honest language, climate crisis. The whole conversation around 1.5 at the COPs is totally disingenuous. Everyone knows that we've blown it, and they're still talking about 1.5. I've been talking with my Pacific networks and the representatives going and saying, you've got to call them out. You've got to call people out for the 1.5 conversation. It's gone. It's yesterday. We're on a trajectory for at least 3. Even if we did everything right today, yeah. Anton, did you mention that lag? We're still going to hit a higher average temperature increase. It's unavoidable. Yeah, there's that. And I also want to invite, if people want to participate in UNDESA, the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs, I've been contracted to help them produce the next publication on the state of the world's Indigenous peoples. The focus is on climate crisis. So we're looking for the priority issues to structure chapters around. We're looking for authors for those chapters. We're looking for content and all that sort of thing. So if you're interested or know people who are interested, I think I'm giving a rhetorical question here because we must be interested. This is like the biggest thing ever on our plate. Please contact me or just share that notice with your networks and have them contact me, because we need to promote Indigenous perspectives in this scenario because we just keep getting ignored. So thank you very much for giving me the floor. Kia ora.
Thank you very much for that, Catherine. I think the analogy that you said about the desperate embrace of techno fixes, especially as the crisis becomes worse, is really very graphic, I would say. More desperate, the more the situation gets desperate, the more the crisis gets worse, the more that formal institutions that you would expect to behave more sanely, to embrace desperate fixes or desperate technologies that have not been proven at all, or many of them have been proven to be detrimental to the environment and to people. So we will see. We should actually expect more of these false solutions to come up louder, with such a strong push from industries and corporate players that are meant or that are intending to profit from these desperate measures that will not work, that will actually not prevent us from tipping over. So I think we really have to be very strong as civil society in calling for the real solutions that we have been calling for, which are actually being drowned now in the chorus of false solutions that are being pushed by corporations and more with backing of governments.
So we have 6 more minutes for open discussion if anyone would want to share their thoughts. Before we close this session, we invite you to do so, or please continue sharing your thoughts, concerns, questions via chat. Again, we thank you so much for the wonderful engagement that has been happening through the chat.
So, there's a question, is there a legal, from Catherine, is there a legal proceedings underway? You mean legal proceedings against utterly crazy governments and their backers who are embracing desperate solutions? As far as I know, the only legal proceedings at the global level that I know to really run after these lunatics who are actually delivering us to hell is the campaign for the ecocide, in bringing that to the international court, which is, I think, gaining traction. I'm not sure if any of us in this Zoom call is part of that campaign, but it seems to be gaining traction, because I think we're also very desperate about how to protect peoples, how to protect Mother Earth, how to protect all the creatures and biodiversity against these crazy solutions that are being offered, that are now being given credence, not just by governments, but by the UN, of course, with strong backing by corporations. So I think really mobilizing legal proceedings, mobilizing our forces as peoples, and also putting pressure on these institutions that are supposed to be accountable to us as peoples of the world, and also as peoples of in different countries, have to be far stronger than ever. So yeah, we are one with you in calling for that. There was this you mean the Philippines Human Rights Commission, the proceedings against the fossil majors that was filed by Greenpeace I think 3 years ago. I am not actually personally privy on how is that proceeding now in the Philippine legal process, but yes, the Human Rights Commission actually endorsed the culpability of the fossil majors for climate change, and also in relation to violation of the basic rights of people to healthy environment and to good health. So I think those are things that we could pursue at the national level, alongside what other colleagues are pursuing at the global level.
We have a question from Genevieve, if there is some kind of press release or short article to summarize these issues to be disseminated prior to COP27. So just to let you all know, ETC Group will publish a briefing about this, specifically about everything that we've shared with you today. Aside from that, you can expect several press releases and briefing that will be published for COP27 by allies. There will also be one Hands Off Mother Earth coordinator has been collaborating with the DCJ, with the Demand Climate Justice, to write a briefing specifically for COP27. So these are things that we can look out for. And they will definitely be published publicly online.
Yes, and the upcoming briefing of etc. Group on geoengineering in climate negotiations is actually in cooperation with Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung office in New York.
Okay, we have 1 more minute before we end this session. We would like to thank everyone who joined and stayed to the very end, and we appreciate all your inputs, all your sharings, and all the links shared also via the chat. Again, thank you for spending 70 minutes of your time today with us. And we hope that as much as we learn from the engagement on the chat, you also learned from you get to take home something from the things that ETC has shared with you today. Neth, any final words?
Yeah, we're looking forward to see some of you who will be in Sharm el Sheikh for COP27. We will be definitely closely following related spaces and tracks, including tons of side events that are being organized, that will be organized by promoters of geoengineering and their supporters. We will raise critical questions. We will push for our demands, definitely, and we will keep on following those tracks that we have identified, and some other possible spaces as well in the UNFCCC negotiations where this will all come up. So thank you for all the engagement. Thank you for the very lively chats while we are speaking. So we really appreciate your interest, and we hope to be with you in the fight for climate justice to the end. Thank you. Have a nice day.
So just to make a quick clarification, that the briefing that Hands Off Mother Earth is doing is with the Health of Mother Earth Foundation in Nigeria, and not with DCJ. Yeah. Again, thank you all so much, and have a
thanks to to colleagues in the Pacific and Oceania for joining. We really were aiming to have you. So we have it quite early for Asia. So we'll keep on trying to have more Pacific friends and Oceania friends to be with us in future webinars. Thank you.